Hey, Daniel.
Hey Jessica, how are you?
Oh, how are any of us? Hanging in there. I'm all right. Um, how are you doing?
Making it through. I got no plans, but I will say more than any year, I'm very looking forward to New Year's Eve.
Might as well. Hopefully that's yeah, hopefully that feels like some sort of refresh. But our problems surely do not recognize the borders of years. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff that happened just this week, which felt like an entire year. But first, let's introduce ourselves, and then I'll just give a little reminder about Move to Amend to folks who might be new here. I'm Jessica Munger. I'm Move to Amend's program director. I use she, her pronouns. I currently live in Las Vegas, Nevada, Mojave Land, and excited to be here with my friend Daniel.
And I am Daniel Lee, serve on the board of directors for Move to Amend, also on the Culver City Council here in Culver City, California. Also serve on the board of the Backbone Campaign, the Mockingbird Incubator, and the Clean Power Alliance.
All right. So for those of you who might be new here, welcome. Thanks for being here. Move to Amend is a national grassroots campaign to amend the United States Constitution to pass the We the People Amendment, which states that corporations should not have constitutional rights and that money is not free speech. So we've got chapters, we call them affiliates, all over the country doing really good grassroots movement building towards constitutional renewal and making real the promise of democracy, which we don't think we've ever had in this country. So that's our work. You can check us out at movetoamend.org and read a bunch of stuff there.
Yeah, and I feel like, maybe our first topic is appropriate to be a transition from what you said, like the fact that we've never had a real democracy in this country. Is really sort of exemplified by this incredibly awkward and inept attempt at a coup. Like I think the Four Seasons landscaping company really sort of exactly it exemplifies this entire administration and really sort of puts into focus who really ran this country for 4 years. And it sort of makes my head explode. Not only that after 4 years, people would consider voting for this person again. Because I mean, I don't know, the economy, not great, offensive to everyone and their brother, responsible for 9/11 many times over, many times over. You can say without a doubt that the president killed over 100,000 people, and over 71 million people still voted for him. And some of them believe that the election was stolen. I don't know. I don't know. I thought I knew which country I lived in, and I didn't think my standards were high. Uh, but it's mind blowing. Like it's mind blowing. I just don't know.
Yeah, it's that is the most depressing part maybe about this entire situation is like we have Trump out of office, hopefully. But that doesn't mean that people all around us voted for him. And so like we have a cultural problem, like in so many ways. It's really terrifying. And like this coup is so interesting because there are people generating these totally fabricated stories about like fraudulent elections, and I'm like, the elections are fraudulent, but not for the reasons that you're saying. Like, how about like money in politics and voter suppression and things that each administration has been guilty of, right? But yeah, the election is undemocratic, but it's not because Trump votes are missing or something. Like, it's so interesting that people are willing to believe that.
The thing that weirds me out is like, one, I gave up on like maturity a long time ago. I feel like it's a myth for so many people. Um, but like, I feel like Trump and then a lot of the people who continue to support him are like that kid that you're playing kickball with, who like loses, like his team loses, but it's his ball, so he takes the ball and he just goes home, and it's just like, didn't you ever learn about like losing and winning and back and forth and winning not really mattering unless you've had the experience of losing and loss and how that makes it more valuable? And like, did you not like go from 7 years old to like 13 years old? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm very, even though, like I said, like I know people don't mature. Like it's a myth for many people. I thought people were committed to pretending.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I don't know. It's really like kind of, I mean, it's not comical because it like has implications, but it's almost comical to wake up every morning and be like, what's the story now? Okay. I don't know. The sore losership is like overwhelming. Um, but okay, so there's a lot that happened in the election. We're not the first post-election making sense, so we won't like go into all of it, but there are a couple things we did want to talk about. First, I want to say hey to some people in the comments though. Delphine, George, Greg, Millie, Ambrosia, Cindy, Peter. Hey everybody, thanks for being here. Hey JD. All right, so you're in California. Let's talk about that because that was a mess. What the hell happened?
California, there's a great article, I think it was in The Guardian, um, this week, that basically said California is not as liberal as you think. And I feel like a lot of us, particularly in Los Angeles County and in the Bay Area, have been screaming this for a long time. There was a lot of celebration in the midterms in 2018, because at that point, some Republican seats in Orange County, California, which is the bastion of Reagan and Nixon, uh, went to Democrats. So I think at that point, all of the congressional delegation from California, almost all of it, was Democratic. This time around, some of those seats went back to Republicans. It was a razor thin margin. But then there were some real propositions on the ballot. And not every state has the proposition system, but it's the way by which, citizens supposedly can put something on the ballot to change the laws in the state without going through the legislature. So this time we had three really compelling ballots, two that I'll mention that lost pretty badly, but one that really aligns with move to amend principles that everybody actually thought was going to win. One was Prop 16, and it would have rolled back Prop 209. And Prop 209 was a proposition that said that you cannot consider race um, as a consideration in government hiring, college applications, things like that. Um, it's basically an anti-affirmative action proposition that lost very badly, and supposedly liberal to progressive California, which at this point does not even have a racial majority anymore, which makes it even more interesting that that proposition lost. I think there's this myth that we get in America around our own personal effort, which really discounts the forces of oppression and how they operate within our system for people of color, for women, for queer people, for disabled people. Um, if we had passed Prop 16, we could have tried to do something to address, these really large systems of oppression that cannot be denied operationally. But that lost, and it lost pretty badly. I think by about 10 points. The other thing that was on the ballot was Prop 21, and Prop 21 would have repealed a court ruling called Costa Hawkins, which basically restricted the ways in which rent control can be applied. So right now, like in Culver City, we confirmed our rent control measure, and that is a bright spot. One second. in Culver City, there was a measure on the ballot to try to strip away the rent control that we as a city council passed. That measure failed, thankfully. So we still have rent control in Culver City. What Prop 21 would have done, but because of Costa-Hawkins, our rent control only applies to properties that were built prior to 1995. Prop 21 would have broadened that context and allowed us to have rent control on properties built after 1995. And it would have actually applied to many, many more Californians. Los Angeles County and California is going through a housing crisis and a housing affordability crisis. People pay not just over 50% of their monthly income on housing, but as much as 75%. And you can't have a life with that because there are other things you got to pay for too. But to wrap up this little segment on California propositions, I'll get to the one that was the most surprising and galling, Prop 15. And it was called Schools and Communities First. What it would have done is repealed Prop 13, which was a proposition that passed in the late 70s, went into effect in the early 80s, that set a cap on property taxes. And what that cap had the effect of doing is, sure, if you're a homeowner, your property taxes stayed the same, and you were more able to pay for things down the line after you've paid off your home. But if you are a large corporation and you own multiple properties across the state, in many instances, you are paying less taxes than someone who owns a bungalow. And as a result, before Prop 13 passed, California was towards the top when it comes to K through 12 education, college education, principally because we had the money to spend on it. After Prop 13 and since, we're towards the bottom. We're like 45, 47, occasionally 50 when it comes to K through 12 and when it comes to college education. And we're saddling our students with debt because of the price of college education. A number of people I know in certain movements got their PhDs from places like Berkeley and UCLA for as little as a couple $100. Right now, if you're in most PhD programs at those public universities, they will pay for your tuition. Then they will tell you you have to get a job as a TA, and then you will realize that you need another job. Otherwise, you won't be able to eat. So Prop 15 would have changed that situation. It would have also brought more money into our K through 12 schools, but it lost.
Yeah. And so that means, though, remember that there is a lot of land in California. And so you have places like Disneyland built in the middle of Southern California with so much land, and then Chevron, right? In the Bay Area are paying nowhere near the amount of property taxes that they need to be paying. Are you kidding me? There's these giant corporations, and I mean, California is unlivable for most people. We moved out of California last year after my wife did get a PhD from UCLA, and we're so much in debt, because of it. You have Disneyland just hanging out.
Exactly. And one of the things that the corporations have done is, I forget the name of the process, but they've basically shifted the title of the property without selling it. So it actually has changed hands, but because of some, creative tax law, they don't have to pay for it. They might have amassed more property, but they still don't have to pay taxes on that property because, supposedly this shell company still owns it, even though, Mickey Mouse is there every day.
Right. Yeah. California is a really, really interesting place. Let's see. I want to look at these comments here. Thanks, everyone. The outcome of various California propositions be different with the We the People amendment in place. You want to speak to that one?
Significantly different, I think. And thanks for that question, Paul. Because the We the People amendment, of course, says corporations are not people and money is not free speech. Citizens United said that corporations are people and money is speech, so therefore you cannot limit the amount of money that corporations spend on elections. One of the reasons that we saw the results that we saw in California is because corporations spent so much money on elections, on Prop 15 in particular, Prop 21 very obviously, and I don't know. I'd have to look into the records for Prop 16, but it would align with the history of our country if corporations did spend money to defeat racial equality. It would be in line with the entire history of our country. But with the We the People Amendment in place, corporations could not spend money on elections at all. And I think there would have to be a more honest discussion about what these propositions are, and there would be less fear mongering. And I think you would see substantively different results.
Absolutely. And to that point, Prop 22 in California had to do with Lyft and Uber drivers having
Yeah.
status as employees versus contractors, right? And that was, I think, the most expensive proposition campaign in the history of anywhere ever, right? And it was, and you can't compete with the amount of propagandizing that can be done with that much money.
Because there are other things you got to pay for too. Yeah,
Yeah.
no. I mean, I'm glad you brought that one up. I think that one had slipped my mind because I was just so angry about it. Uber and Lyft spent $200 million basically making the argument that if we give our drivers like healthcare and actual hours, then we'll go bankrupt, even though we can afford to spend $200 million on one proposition campaign. It doesn't make sense. And there are a number of people I know who are Uber and Lyft drivers. Los Angeles is a creative economy. A lot of friends are musicians or actors, and most of them were on board. But there were enough, the one or two who were like, yeah, I just need to maintain my flexibility. Like they bought into the arguments that were, projected onto our television screens on YouTube and everywhere around flexibility. And it just, uh, it frustrated me so much because it's like you can still have flexibility. That the law that was passed by the legislature does not impede the ability for you to have that if your company agrees to it. What they're trying to do is keep you as an independent contractor to keep their costs low, to make sure that the majority of the benefits from the service that you provide goes to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And like Matthew's saying, the advertising, I mean, with that much money, it's, of course it was effective, right? And they would pick like people who may or may not have been drivers themselves to kind of relay this message. But, if you offer a gig worker a little bit of money to say something on camera, sometimes you say something on camera. It's really amazing the amount of propaganda that you can afford when you are trying to screw over your employees, and it's going to cost you less to spend that much money propagandizing than it will to treat your workers.
And the biggest thing, which like I wish the no on 22 people would have highlighted more, is that not only that this law passed, is it part of it was that in order to change this law, you need a 7/8 vote, like not a majority, but you need 7 out of 8. I think it's in the assembly and the Senate to vote to repeal. That's crazy. That's not democratic. That's like, okay, we bought this law and we want to keep it this way. So we're going to make it incredibly undemocratic to change it.
Yeah.
That should have been an affront to anybody who like actually values voting. Of course, voting is essential to the process, but it's not the end all be all. And it should not be taken as that. But if you believe in voting, that 7/8, that should have offended you.
Yeah. Well, okay. I do want to say there were a couple of not terrible things that happened in this
Really?
election. A couple, specifically 50, because there were 50 people elected to office who have taken the move to amend, pledge to amend. The pledge to amend says, I'm going to use my office to fight for the We the People Amendment and advance the principles of abolishing corporate personhood and money as speech. So we had hundreds of people who have taken the pledge, candidates from every office up and down the ballot, and 50 of our folks won. That's exciting. With what did I say?
Woo!
5 of those are Congress people, including like Cori Bush and some of these other total badasses. So that's really exciting that we've got people up and down ballots, including in Congress, who support the We the People Amendment. So good job, everybody. A bunch of you on this call who did the work to bring in tons of pledges. That is a really important work, because as we build this movement towards the amendment and towards constitutional democratization, we need to have people in office who are, not just going to toe the party line and be corporatists, but people who are dedicated to, movement-led solutions. So.
Yeah, we need standard bearers, and I'm particularly excited about Cori Bush myself. But we need standard bearers across the country. In California, we passed Prop 59 many years ago, calling for a constitutional amendment. So we know we're on board there. The New York City Council passed a resolution in 2012 or late 2011, but we need standard bearers across the country. A lot of the heart and soul of this movement is in, Wisconsin and Minnesota and Ohio. And we need representatives in those areas to really, push this forward. And I'm just excited that we actually picked up a few.
Totally. Yeah, it was not bad. And we had, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there were folks in, I'm going to say Ohio and Wisconsin, who passed some initiatives towards the We the People Amendment. And as we always see, the We the People Amendment is really transpartisan, because the same folks who voted for Donald Trump in the exact same day, voted to support the We the People Amendment. So I think if we can all agree on anything, it's that corporations are ruling everything, and that needs to change.
Yeah, and I think that's a good transition point to to talk about what Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said about the differences in what I would say the mostly corporate Democrats wanted their candidates to run on, and then the candidates that actually ran on things that people support by large margins in polls, like Medicare for All. And, the candidates in that party who ran on Medicare for All, by and large, won by significant amounts, so it's not weird or strange or potentially dangerous to talk about what people want and to talk about policies that really benefit people. In fact, it's something that can help you win. And I think, that needs to be underlined. I make, a joke, like the Democrats and the Republicans obviously seem to just be obsessed with obtaining power and not really focused on policy. If they might be focused on the way the wind blows sometimes, but they're mostly focused on maintaining power and putting structures in place that would help them maintain power. But if you see with issues like Medicare for All, you could still be in power and you would be helping people. Why would you not do that? I just completely don't understand. And it makes the frustration at our two-party system, very, very apparent. It's okay, you got some criticisms of the Republicans. They're definitely going down the Nazi route at the moment. The Democrats, they're not that, but they have some aversion to helping people, even when it would not be a detriment to their stranglehold on power. And that needs to be attacked and criticized. And we need to not, pretend that this party is so much better.
Yeah, what you're saying is generous, right? But also, yeah, we saw in this election that, hey, if you lean your head out the window and listen to the people in the streets are yelling, they're saying, we need healthcare. We're dying and being evicted, and we actually understand what's going on and have some political savvy and will actually unseat you for someone who is going to support Medicare for all. And like, it seems like so many, I mean, that's what we saw with Biden, right? What policy was even being proposed? I mean, there's nothing, right? But we
I'm
are.
not Trump. I'm not Trump.
I'm not Trump. That's not a policy. We know, like we have eyes, you know. But I think that it's really powerful that so many candidates who were running on the support of Medicare for all were elected. I hope that remains a line that they'll hold.
Well, yeah, and I hope, like, you know, the Democrats take note that, you know, more Republicans voted for Trump this time than last time. So efforts to triangulate and move towards the right, and efforts like the Lincoln Project, you know, let the Lincoln Project be the Lincoln Project. Don't let it be like part of the Democratic Party. I think I was not alone in being one of the people who was incredibly offended that at the Democratic convention, people like John Kasich and others were foregrounded. I think that's offensive, both on policy lines in terms of the policies that people have been asking for, but also along like racial lines. Your party and the party of the future, the country of the future, is very Latino. It is very Asian. It is Black. It's mixed. And you keep trotting out old white Republican men at a Democratic convention. What are you thinking?
Yeah, that's going away. Yeah, I mean, and for all intents and purposes, Biden's a Republican. I think just should be underlined here, right?
I'm going to take no comment on that one.
You're an elected official. I'll say it. Yeah, so that's interesting. But I want to say, I think one thing that I see come out of like 2020, the shit show that this has been in so many ways, and then this really odd election, is that I think more people than ever are understanding that these aren't just a bunch of small problems that happen to coexist, but they actually are a result of structural problems, like constitutional problems, and that we can't just keep putting bandages on these giant wounds. You know, we actually have to fix the problem. And so a couple of weeks ago, we hosted with a couple of our partner organizations a People's Movement Assembly to talk about constitutional democratization and like how, you know, I think that there was a lot of energy around the idea that the problems that we're seeing have a root in our foundational structures. And that's encouraging.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, the People's Movement Assembly was very inspiring. And, you know, well executed by you again, Jessica. But like it sort of dovetailed with like a lot of stuff that happened this summer. Like there were frankly discussions that I've been trying to have on the city council level around the need for someone other than the police to respond to mental health issues, you know, around you know, the demographics of those in our city who are actually pulled over by police and things like that weren't really getting any type of attention as recently as February. But that completely changed in May. And you know, by June it was like we need to do something. And I you know, in my day-to-day work, I work at the James Lawson Institute with Reverend James Lawson. And of course, he's been around for very many struggles, you know, started with the lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville, but, you know, the Freedom Rides, Montgomery bus boycott. He trained a lot of the people who are elected officials in California, like seriously, almost all of them. And he trained the folks who went on to found United We Dream and were undocumented and unafraid. But even he had to give really large credit to Black Lives Matter and the fact that, you know, over 700 cities around the country and around the world were in the streets demanding change. And as a result, you know, municipalities started taking much larger steps. Candidates who ran on things like my new colleague in Burbank, California, who ran on defunding the police, Constantine Anthony, won. He got the most votes in Burbank. Bur- just for reference, Burbank is not South Central and it's not the LBC,
Yeah.
um, but he won. And I think that speaks to a new notion of possibility that I hope will grow in the country, because it's not just police brutality and systemic racism that we have to deal with. You know, it's the climate crisis, it's rape culture,
Mhm.
and misogyny. You know, it's the fact that, technically gay people can get married, but there's a whole lot of homophobia and specifically transphobia that is still out there. And it just speaks to the possibility for us to take some step toward actually addressing this stuff in an open way. And when the first affirmative action laws started to come down, that was it's underreported. It's not doesn't show up in our history, but that was a moment where the country was like, yes, racism, it's a problem. We should do something about it. Affirmative action might not have been perfect, but it was an admission by a collective group of people. Yes, we fucked up, and we have been fucking up for a long time, and we need to do something substantive to address that. I think there is still a possibility for a broader swath of people and, more important, policymakers to come to that realization again across the board. Also, candidates who ran on reparations won as well.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, totally. And I think one thing Black Lives Matter has done really well, especially in 2020, is like helped people to be able to articulate specifically what those demands are.
There's still,
Am I there?
yeah, you're
Sorry, my internet's a little funny. Yeah, so in 2018, we had a PMA, a People's Movement Assembly, on the same question of constitutional renewal. And the demands that came out of that were really solid, but they were a little bit vague, right? Of course, support Black Lives Matter, somehow start mending like racial injustices. They were very broad. And what I saw this year, going through the notes that came out of the hundreds of people who were involved in the PMA, was very concrete things. Like, instead of just like support the movement for Black lives, it was like defund the police, reinvest in these things, like get the, it was a lot more specific. And I think that that's exciting that we have some ideas of what are the policies and specifics that that we need to have happen in order to realize these larger goals or directions. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, no, I felt like a difference in uh, a larger openness to like a possibility at this year's People's Movement Assembly. People, like I might have been a little disappointed in like some of the policies that they put forward, frankly, but
Yeah.
they had very specific ideas of ways to address like issues, and it wasn't just like the same people from a couple years ago maturing. It was completely new people. Like, one accepting, yes, this premise, accepting the possibility. I think I think there's been a lot of really sort of substantive, and I know people like to decry cancel culture or whatever that is, and I'm like, I don't like that phrase, because if you're doing horrible oppressive stuff, you should be called out.
Yeah.
Like, you should stop doing that. That's not cancel culture. That's, being a good human. Um, but like people I used to try to apply that to like, the founding fathers, when, all that really does, like talking about their, reality as a human being really just gives us, a clearer picture of who they were. Um, sometimes I feel like we joke, like people think they were like fathers and stuff, and most of them are like 23. And it's like, was it the Whigs that like people think they're like, grandfathers or something like that? Like, but they were people who had ideas that were different, and for that time period, more open and humanitarian, but still oppressive. Still consolidating power within the landed gentry, still consolidating power within male identified people, still consolidating power within white people. They weren't perfect. So talking about them in an honest way, I think, gets us closer to the point where we're like, oh, that's who they were. We could probably write something better.
Yeah, totally. I think that's exactly right. And I won't go off on the founding fathers exactly right now, but I will say that I think it's also what you're saying is important, because it's ahistorical to believe that like people at the time that the Constitution was crafted didn't understand that slavery was bad, which is a thing that comes up, right? Like nobody knew, it was just the times. And it's like, well, the people who were being enslaved, they definitely knew. And also all of the abolitionists, they definitely knew. And, like, so by saying that, you're saying that actually you also believe that the only people who were considered people were those property owning white men. So just to be clear, like, we all, like, someone always screams at me about like, well, they didn't know better. Like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, they knew.
They did.
Exactly. I mean, that's a beautiful point to make. Like, every time someone references some time period and they're like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but what about these scholars who are saying this? Like, what about this evidence that I can show you at every point in time when you say, no? Because, they're documented people who knew, like, and there was like international trade, like, prior to colonialism, where people actually, traded with like Africa, Europe, Asia, traded, before like, the transcontinental slave trade became a thing. People worked together. Wow. Like it wasn't like and okay, I don't want to go on a tirade, but like, as someone who loves music, I like to remind people that things like the violin and the piano and all that jazz came from Africa, and the banjo came from Africa, and mathematics is Islamic, and we get noodles from China, and like everything that you value in your life came from a person of color. A white person takes credit. Didn't want to go down that road, but it's just like, we think the history is about reframing to some degree, and true history is about facts. And I know people are allergic to those things, but like they are useful. Reframing is just centering, like I think it's very instructive. And a professor recommended this a long time ago, and I've only done it once. But to read a history of the world from another continent's perspective, it is very elucidating. It gets you out of your brain. It gets you out of this like American Eurocentric context. You can read a history of the world from South America, from Asia, from Africa, and it might they're privy to the same faults and biases as we are, but it will give you a different perspective in terms of how everything came to be.
Mm-hmm. Totally. For me, I think that I didn't hear so many of those stories until I was reading Howard Zinn, which I think is really, really important history. It's still Howard Zinn, wrote a lot of different kinds of histories, but he was also one of the original signers on the Move to Amend resolution. So the late Howard Zinn. So yeah, we believe in telling the truth even when it pisses a lot of people off, which I'm sure this does. But we've been doing that a while. Okay, so thanks for that. And I think that that's a good transition, Daniel, into like how we wanted to talk a little bit about Veterans Day, which happened recently. Speaking of American imperialism and rewriting of history, let's talk about Vets Day. You're a veteran, as is Keon Bliss, who's also on our team. What comes up for you on Veterans Day? What does that feel like to you?
Well, for me, it's sort of complicated because I usually like to qualify it because, I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force and the California Air National Guard, but I was never in a position where my life was really on the line. I mean, basic training was rough. I got sick a couple times. There's this one person who tried to bully me, and I was like, everybody here likes me more than you. That's not gonna work. Um,
Yeah.
but uh, but I try to make a distinction from between me and people who've really been in harm's way because my uncle was deployed in Desert Storm, Desert Shield, and Operation Enduring Freedom. My aunt, I regularly went to on humanitarian missions in El Salvador. I think four of my great uncles were in World War II and the Korean War, and they've all served. So my service is different. But, the one thing that sort of connects us is, how our service was used. And to some degree, I think people are coming more to an understanding about how United States military not only is a tool of imperialism from just like a nation state to nation state basis, but is also a tool for corporations. You know, there are Americans around the world in various different countries. We don't necessarily have to be there for any reason. There's not a whole lot of reason to have a lot of us in Spain or Portugal or Germany. Um, there. I mean, the people in Japan want us gone badly. Like there are similar movements in South Korea and things like that. Um, we're there without conflict for decades so that we can still be there, so that the people who are paying for aircraft and tanks and all of that jazz can continue making aircrafts and tanks whether or not we're at war. I think currently the American public has less of an appetite for war, um, but the military machine moves on. Like the Pentagon budget does not dip; it increases, and it's like, well, okay, if we had more tanks and more aircraft than every other military in the world combined for the last 20 years, why do we need a whole new order this year? Like what's up with that? Can't we just wait? Like can't we use do it like a cell phone and once once our battery starts dying really quickly then re-up. But no, we go on because we're keeping these defense industries solvent. Like the entire purpose of the military at this point is really just to fund the defense industry. And I usually relate to people that I was a little afraid when I joined the military because I, like many people, joined for financial reasons. I joined for help paying off my student loans after I got my undergraduate degree in film at USC. And I was afraid that I would encounter a whole lot of people who are ideological one way or another. And that was not the case. Like, I encountered people who were there for economic reasons. And there was a tweet I shared this week on our Facebook um, from a military veteran who basically said, I am a 6-year Marine Corps veteran. Signing my life away, I found temporary relief from poverty. I was homeless once I wasn't needed any longer. Most people who I served with stayed in because they had nowhere else to go. Thank veterans by ending poverty and war. And I wholeheartedly agree with that because we don't have the actual draft anymore, but we have the economic draft. And for low income white people, for low income people of color, and increasingly, and these people actually got sort of pushed around in the Trump administration, but for immigrants, a lot of immigrants were told, okay, we'll put you on the path to naturalization if you join the military. And some of those veterans were still deported, after they went here and got shot at for America. And our military is basically that. It's the poorest people in the world well, the poorest people in our country, not the world, fighting wars for rich industry, to make a rich industry richer.
Mhm.
So every time I think of Veterans Day, I think of the fact that we should be taking care of those people, one, who fought for this country in any way, shape, or form once they get back. But the best way to take care of them is to not send them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Daniel. And Greg shared a couple things in the comments as you were speaking. The Vets for Peace website, we've worked with them on many occasions. They do really good stuff. Also, Greg is talking about how Veterans Day was originally Armistice Day, dedicated to peace and no more war, and that it was co-opted, like so many of our holidays, have been, to disrupt the solidarity of anti-war and working people. And I think that is the U.S. military budget is what the next 10 countries combined military budget is. And I think that is really evident when we see elections with like a highly neoliberal candidate like Joe Biden. Like the Obama administration with Joe Biden's input was one of the most like deadly administrations that we've had, right? We dropped a lot of bombs, and Joe Biden has signed off on that many times. And like we think that Uber campaign was propagandizing. Like the military industrial complex has the most strong propaganda, in the world. And there's a lot of people, a lot of Joe Biden's friends and Trump's friends making a whole lot of money off of every single bomb that drops. And Democrats will drop them just as many as Republicans will. And I think that, the war for profit is like one of the most insulting and
Disgusting.
disgusting things like that's ever plagued the planet, probably.
Yeah, and I mean, it can't be underestimated how much war actually does plague the planet and accelerate the climate crisis as well. And if Biden is serious, and I feel like, I was joking earlier. There was a line at brunch, so Biden should be ready to get pushed. If there weren't, 10 people in front of me, maybe
Yeah.
he could rest on his laurels. But if he's serious about addressing climate change, then he should be serious about, like, scaling down the military industrial complex in the United States, and not fighting wars for profit. Like, if you're serious about addressing this issue and you make no changes on this other issue, then you're not serious.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So that's all, our work as we continue to organize and agitate and educate, no matter who's in office, because we have a lot to do as people who don't want endless war and poverty and climate collapse. So yeah, we're not going back to brunch.
No more brunch.
No, it's too bad, because brunch is delicious, but
I mean, it's the best meal of the day.
best meal of the day. But damn it, we can't have anything. Yeah, well, thanks again for sharing that perspective, Daniel, about your military experience and all of that. Let's see, what else? Is there anything else we should talk about here before we wrap up?
Well, I want people to be vigilant, and to not assume that we're going to have a smooth transition of this presidency, because why would we? It's 2020 and it's this idiot. There have been some stories about, like, Trump just keeping his campaign open and, like, raising funds for, like, Defend Democracy or whatever it is he's talking about, just so he can pay off his campaign debt. I don't want those stories to lull us into a sense of complacency. Because I mean, there's a lot that we need to do as a country. We need to pass the We the People Amendment. We need to work towards, true democracy. We need to elect leaders that actually represent us and not corporations. Um, uh, and we need to be sort of vigilant as we work towards those goals. And we can't assume that anything is going to happen.
So
Uh, we just need to be aware. I know it's been a hard year. I know we've been hyper aware because of every horrible thing that happens every day. But we can't go to sleep yet. We can't go back to brunch yet.
yeah. Yeah. So I think that a couple things folks can do right now would be, if you haven't signed the Move to Amend motion, please do that. That's an organizing tool that we use to get you plugged into the grassroots work that's happening all around the country to pass the We the People Amendment, movetoamend.org/motion. Also, there are a lot of ways to engage with the movement, like whatever your skills or analysis is, like there's a place for you. If that place is financial support, we need that too. We obviously don't get money from big corporations or family foundations or political parties. So we all give each month to make this work happen. And it's been a hard year financially because it's been a hard year for all of our donors. So if you've got some cash that you can spare, that goes a long way, especially if you sign up as a monthly sustaining donor. That allows us to know what our budget's going to be for the following month, so we know what we can do. So thank you if that's how you can support the movement right now. Other things you can do are to check out, if you're interested in this work that we've done around constitutional renewal and reimagining the US Constitution, check it out. Movetoamend.org's got a bunch of really interesting stuff to read. We have a lot of things on our website. So if you just kind of want to dig into some of this stuff, go read the website. If you click on the Learn More tab, you'll see tons and tons of resources if this is getting you excited. Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate your perspective as always. And
thank you as well. Always good to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. And you have a good weekend. We'll see you all next week here, same time, same place, where we'll make sense of the next week that feels like an entire year. All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Everybody.